Hi, this is Robin, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about focus stacking to achieve front to back sharpness when using Photoshop's Auto Blend Layers feature. As usual, what I'd like to do is just start quickly and say, what is focus stacking? Let's define it so you know what even is and if it's relevant to what you'd like to do. So what focus stacking does is it lets you create a single image in which the scene details from different focal planes are all sharp. So the process is really used to create pretty incredible depth of field. Now, the way to achieve that is to capture a series of images, each with a different focus point or focus plane layered throughout a scene, and then blend those separate images into one merged image in Photoshop. So just looking at this setup that I have here is sort of a visual example of what you're trying to do. You have your camera set up here. We have a scene that has pretty decent depth of field to it in terms of distances involved. And what we're trying to do is set up manual focus points on various planes. So even though I'm showing points, each point represents a plane. So you would first focus on this first plane, then going back deeper into the scene, the next plane. This tree, in anything on that plane, is a little further back. And then, of course, the mountains are in the most distant plane. So that's what you're doing, is capturing a series of images that represent different planes in the image, and then you'll be able to put them all together so that instead of just ending up with a shallow depth of field where the closest item is in focus and everything else is soft, everything should be sharp from front to back. Okay, so that's a basic definition for what's involved. And as I said, by focus stacking a set of manually focused, and that's why I'm emphasizing that here, manually versus auto-focused set of images, your final image can be made sharp from front to back. Now, the nice thing about this is you might say, well, gee, why don't I just set my aperture to f/18 or f/22, and won't that give me a really deep depth of field? Well, the thing is, by using this focus stacking sort of approach, you can achieve that same kind of depth of field or more deep depth of field without sacrificing light by stopping down your aperture. When you stop down your aperture, things get darker if it gets too small. So you can enhance the depth of field without sacrificing light is another way to say that. So keep in mind that not every scene that you shoot will need focus stacking, but it is great when your camera either can't handle depth of field, or you have something like this where there's something pretty close in the foreground and then you have to go off to pretty distant infinity in the background. Another example I'll talk about in a little while is macro photography too. So getting to that as a segue, what I'm going to cover in this video workshop, so I've just told you the what of focus stacking. I've defined what it is, but I will also cover which photo genres benefit most from using it. I'll mention some high-level considerations for how to capture the shots you'll need in order to do focus stacking. And then I'll demo how to load and blend your captured images using Photoshop's Auto Blend Layers in order to create a focus stacked single image. Now, what I'll do is, because this has a lot of different chapters, as I've just mentioned, several chapters, components to this tutorial video, I will include the links to the start times for each chapter in the description below the video, so you can either view or review topics of interest to you at your convenience. You don't have to sit through the whole thing if you don't want to in one sitting. As a quick reminder, you can follow me to have YouTube send you a single alert to new video content that I post. All you have to do is click the subscribe button and the black bell icon below the video. It's absolutely free. Subscribe is sort of a misnomer. It's more of a following. But if you have subscribed already, you're all set. You absolutely don't have to do that, clicking on that subscribe every time you look at one of my videos. Just do it once and you're set. Okay, so now let me go into the next part of the video, as I mentioned. So we talked about what focus stacking is. I also hinted that it is really beneficial in a variety of different photographic genres. And the ones that come to mind most for me are deep landscape. So like what I have in this example here, where there's some kind of a foreground object and then it goes off into a fairly decent distance. That's what I call a deep landscape. Another example are macro shots or macro photography. So macro lenses, if you haven't worked with them, and if you have, you would know that they have very shallow depth of field. So one very specific part of a macro image is in focus and then it gets soft really fast. So you might want to be able to capture slices of different parts of the object that you're shooting for macro and then put them together if you do want front to back sharpness versus that soft effect or that bokeh effect. Another example of photography where focus stacking would be handy is tabletop product photography, I guess is the best way to describe it. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing commercial product photography or if you're doing social media commerce, it's handy in both those instances for product photography, again, to show front to back sharpness versus some softness in your image. Another type of photography where focus stacking comes in handy is both interior and exterior architecture shots. And I'd say that even some instances of travel photography, it could be really helpful to use focus stacking. So let me look and show you here another benefit in using manual or using landscape photography as an example. So this is a shot I made in a local park just to show you, and let me expand this up so hopefully you can see this a little better. And so here's the park, and similar to that example that I just showed you, I'm standing in a gazebo. So this is the railing of the gazebo. You can see we have trees in this moderately close, what I'd call midground. So this is the foreground, this is some midground. And then in a little further back mid-ground, we have this cluster of trees. Then what I would classify as getting to the background is this tree back here, and it's hard to see it, but there's a little piece of public art in this silver public art here in this park. So again, we've got a foreground to a background, and this is where I put the focus point or the focus plane. So right across, if you sort of look from here and kind of straight across, that's the plane where that focus point was placed. And if we get a little bigger with this, let me zoom in a bit for you, you can see. So where I put the focus point is right around here in this, so you can see it's fairly sharp, but already this tree that's just a very, I mean, they're right adjacent to each other. You can see this is softer. The railing is kind of soft. Definitely when we get back to this cluster of trees back here, you can see it's softer. The background trees are soft. And here's that piece of public art I was telling you that is also pretty soft because the focus plane or the focus point was right up here. And as I've noted, I was using an f/14 aperture and an exposure compensation of -0.3. So that's what I used for the setting in that park. So that's why it would be, if I want to have this sharp from front to back, then that's where I would think about using something like focus stacking to work with it and try to sharpen up this image. Now I'm going to be covering, because my whole channel is focused on using my whole channel is focused on Photoshop and working with Photoshop to create fine art photography. I am going to cover how to improve the sharpness using focus stacking in Photoshop. But there are other specialized software available out there, just so you can know, like Helicon Focus, and I believe there's another one but that I haven't worked with. But I do, as I say, work with Photoshop, so that's what I'm going to talk about and demonstrate in this video. What I will cover next, because before you can get to the stacking, you have to have the images to stack. So next I'm going to cover different capture methods that I suggest and that I try to use in order to be able to create focused stacked images in Photoshop. So let's move on to the next part here. So let's talk about some image capture tips and what to keep in mind before you do want to move into the focus stacking stage. So first, be sure your camera is on a steady tripod. You may even want to use a shutter release or set a timer in your camera to avoid camera shake, because every time you press the shutter, there is going to be some camera shake, even if you do have it on a tripod. Now, what I would suggest is if your camera has image stabilization, turn it off while shooting on a tripod so it doesn't try to stabilize and create some jitter on your camera during that. Just be sure to turn that stabilization back on after you take the camera off of the tripod. If you're, I don't want to totally knock out hand holding if you don't want to be lugging a tripod around. So if you're going to do any hand holding, definitely when you're taking your images, brace against a sturdy surface. So either lean against a wall and brace yourself, or lean against a railing or something like that, just so that you can stay very still. Some of you might have more rock steady hands than I do, but anyway, try to brace yourself in some way if you're not going to use a tripod. Another suggestion I'd have is try to shoot in RAW. The more data you have to work with, the better the camera images will be, and the camera won't have to work with pre-processed or compressed JPEGs. That's not to say you can't use JPEGs. If that's all you have at your disposal, give it a shot, and it will certainly be better than not doing the focus stacking. But preferably shoot in RAW, and then you can control the different settings that you're going to be using with your images. Put the camera either in aperture priority or manual mode. You don't want it to be in program mode or in auto mode or something where it's going to be changing around and shifting apertures or shutter speeds or things like that. So aperture priority or manual mode. And I'd say set a moderately small aperture. So it's something maybe around f14 like what I used here. So you get some sharpness, but you don't have to go up to 16, 18, 22. In fact, cameras aren't, depending on your camera, I should qualify that, aren't really optimized for the f18 and f22. The sweet spots are more in the f14, f16. So try to, not go too low so you get too shallow a depth of field, but around f14 is kind of good. And definitely use a lens that allows manual focusing, because that's what you're going to need to be able to do with this. So the first thing you're going to do is frame your shot. So I have mine composed and framed here of what I was trying to capture in this scene. I realize it's not scenic, but it was handy, and that's something I have available here to be able to show you the demonstration. So focus and frame your shot and figure out before you start the process which objects in the scene will be your focus points, or which focus planes you want to work with. So here's a plane, here's a plane, here's a plane, here's a plane, back there's a plane. So figure out so you know it pretty easily when you can go from shot to shot where you want to be focusing. I'd say so I was using a telephoto zoom lens when I did this, and I put it on a fixed focal length and I left it there. I was not going to be adjusting the focal length at all. If you want to create a macro focus stacked shot, either use a macro lens, or if you don't own one, then try using extension tubes, because they'll let you get closer. They're very lightweight and they're inexpensive, and a lot less expensive than a macro lens would be. So what you're going to do is manually place the focus point or focus plane on the first object or point closest in your scene. So for in my case, it would be when I start doing the whole stack versus the example of just this one, I would start on this railing because that's the closest object or plane in the scene that I want to capture. So then take your shot and then just keep repeating. So move to the next focus point or plane, get your manual focus point there, move to the next plane, get your manual focus point and take the shot there, move to your next manual focus area. In my case, they're all sort of on the same plane. Focus and take your shot. So in other words, you just keep focus, shoot, move back to the next plane. Focus, shoot, move back to the next plane. It's a rinse and repeat kind of a process, okay? Now, I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 captures in this particular scene, but there is no formula for the number of focus points to use, so I'd have to say it really depends on your scene. You're just going to have to gauge and say what's in the scene and how many shots do I need before I capture all the relevant planes that I want to be in focus. Now, I will say that probably for macro photography, you will need more than in a landscape scene because, as I said, the lenses go softer, faster, and you're working in a much tighter area. So you might need to be doing more individual shots, like I'm creeping slowly up with this highlighter here. Okay, so a tip I do, and you can decide whether you want to use it or not, is before the first shot in a series. So I call this a series if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that set of 6 captures is what I call a series. And before I start that series, I take a picture of one of my index finger pointed in front of the lens. And then I take my 6 shots, and at the end of the series, I take a shot of 2 fingers in my lens. So that way it tells me, okay, each of these 1s and 2s designates a set or a series. So I know when the series start and when the series end. So if I'm trying multiple series to try to see which one will end up being the best, it's a lot easier to untangle where the series start and stop. And I do the same thing if I'm doing a series of shots for panoramas that I'm going to stitch together too. So 1 at the beginning of the pano series and then 2 at the end. So anyway, so that's just a little thing I do, and you can decide if that's going to help you for your focus stacking captures. Now, another thing to keep in mind is definitely avoid scenes with a lot of motion. So ocean waves, fast moving clouds, blowing treetops, unless you want a special effect to be achieved by doing that, but it will definitely negatively impact your ability to align and stack your series of focus points and image captures if you have a lot of motion in your scene. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so those are the tips that I have for capture and what to keep in mind and how you need to capture the images that you're going to use for focus stacking. So next I'm going to show you how to load your images and some pre-processing steps before actual focus stacking. And so we're going to pause for a moment here while I get that set up so you don't have to watch me going through all the rigmarole of getting this all queued up for you to see here. Okay, so now we are back and I have opened the raw images. So I told you ideally work with raw images when you're doing focus stacking. And so I used an Olympus camera and I was in raw capture mode. So I went in my Photoshop interface, I went to File, Open, and I selected the entire series of raw captured. So as I said, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images in my series from front to back that I captured in camera, and they were all raw images. So File, Open, highlighted all the images that I wanted to open up in Camera Raw to be able to process, and you can see that they are all lined up here on the left. And I'm not going to get into how to configure Camera Raw, but you do have a choice here with this little icon at the bottom to either have your film strip show vertically like mine or across the bottom or none at all, but it's going to be easier if you can see them. So I personally like to work with them vertical there. Okay, so all of my raw images and all your raw images should be opened into Adobe Camera Raw. And what I suggest is that before you start any kind of focus stacking process, do some basic setting adjustments in Camera Raw, or else you can even do it in Lightroom and then bring it into Photoshop, but I don't work with Lightroom. So if anything I'm saying here for in Camera Raw, it would translate and work in Lightroom if that's where you like to do your initial opening and processing of images. Okay, so for this single image, so you can see this one image at the top of the 6 images is highlighted and there's a white frame around it. So that means that's the only image I'm working with right now. So what I'm going to do is just make some basic adjustments over here in the right hand panels before I open these images up to do focus stacking. So I'm going to look and see, does it need a little bit more exposure? Do I need to, yeah, I think I'll lower the highlights a little bit over here on the right where my highlighter is. The shadows are actually looking pretty good. They're not too dark. I usually slide these things around until I see where I like them, the sliders. Let me see, maybe I can, there's some glariness here with the whites, so maybe I can reduce the whites a little bit. And again, I just slide it back and forth till I find a place I like. And I'm not going to noodle too much because you're just going to have to tell for your image what you like and how you like the settings. And then the black, same thing. Are the shadows too dark or do I want them darker? That actually adds a little bit more interest if it's a little darker to me. So I'm going to go that way. I'm going to skip the texture and the clarity and those things just because normally I would adjust them, but I don't want to impact the focus stacking at this point. And then I'll come down for mine to the geometry section and just be sure that this is level. So for mine, I'm just going to hit auto to auto, see if it needs some, yeah, see it did a minor little auto adjustment to straighten out my image because you don't want it to look like your image is unpurposefully tilting. Okay, so once you get your, what I call some basic settings adjustments done, then you come back to your film strip, and that was, again, just done on one image, and then you want to select all of the images. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and click on the bottom image, and so now you can see they're all framed in white, so that means that they're all selected, and when I hover over one of them, you see there's a little dot, 3 dots there, left click on that. And what you want to do is, and it's going to wash out here, but look where I'm just above where my highlighter is. You want to sync the settings. So for those settings that you just made for the one, you want to sync that to all of the images. So left click on that. You'll get this pop-up box that says synchronize. So you just need to, so for the settings that you made on that image, you want to be sure that the boxes for those specific settings are enabled and checked on. And I see here that geometry wasn't clicked on, and I did adjust to straightening, so I'm going to click that on. I don't use high dynamic range because I do not have a monitor that is HDR compatible or that supports HDR. So I just leave that off. But these were the other settings that I used, so I want to be sure they're all set to synchronize all these images, and then click OK. All right, once that's synchronized, so it already did that because it closed the box, then again with all of these images still highlighted and active, come to the bottom if you're in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm sorry, again, I can't help you if you're in Lightroom, but you should know how to open images from there into Photoshop. So go to Open and click on that, and the images, you can see the little processing inside my highlighter there. Photoshop is going to be opening those 6 images into Photoshop for me. Okay, so the processing has stopped and there should be 6 images loaded into Photoshop. So now what we want to do is we want to get all of those, we don't want to work with them as individual tabs. We want them all in one layer stacked together to be able to do the focus stacking. So now that they are open, we're going to go to the upper left of the interface, the Photoshop interface, to the filter menu. I mean the file menu, sorry. Come down to File, Scripts. We're going to go to the flyout menu and come down to Load Files into Stack. So again, sorry, it's File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and left click on that. Okay, so again, we get a pop-up box and it says load layers. Now, if you hadn't already opened your images into Photoshop, you could browse and go and get them, but we already did that. So we're going to come to the right here, right below browse, and say add open files. And we're going to click on that. Definitely do not click on create smart object after loading layers, because auto blend layers in Photoshop does not work on smart objects. So leave that unchecked. So come to where it says add open files and click on that. And what you can see now is it has automatically loaded the layers that we want to have opened into a stack into the box here. So once you can see your files that you want loaded into a layer stack in this area, then you click OK. And then just again wait and watch the right hand side for my layers panel, and you'll see it should be loading them. Okay, so you can see Photoshop has now loaded those 6 individual images that were opened as tabs into a single layer stack, and you can see that it has lowered them from closest to furthest away. So numerically it's going from top to bottom. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to, even if we shot on a tripod, it's very possible, and even if you shot on a tripod using a timer or a shutter release for capture, there still could be some camera movement or shifts in where your camera is, your scene is lining up while you're doing those captures. Because you were moving your focus points, there could be some focus breathing, as they call it, that could cause some focus length shifts. So to be on the safe side, we want to make sure that all of the images in this layers stack in the layers panel are all aligned and lined up completely on top of each other. So what we want to do is select all the images in the layer stack. So we already have the top image selected and highlighted. You can tell that by the blue there. And with that highlighted, I'm going to click the Shift key and then click on the bottom image in the layer stack. And now they are all active and all highlighted. So with all of those layers active and highlighted, again, we're going to go to the upper left of the interface to the Edit menu, and we're going to click on Edit and come down to where it says Auto Align Layers. Okay, so left click on that. So Edit, Auto Align Layers, and left click. And again, another pop-up box. I just leave mine on auto. And because this is all being done on a tripod, it's not like something where a panorama where you'd be going across and you might need to worry about getting rid of vignettes between the different areas of the image. I leave these 2 boxes for lens correction unchecked. So I only have for the projection auto and click on. Okay, rather, sorry. And again, you can see the inside my highlighter, it was doing something. So now Photoshop has hopefully aligned all those layers so every little portion of them are all stacked completely on top of each other. Okay, so now what we want to do is go to the auto blend layers part. So now we're getting to the actual focus stacking part. We've aligned the images, we're ready to focus stack. So what you do next is, again, with all your layers of all your individual manually captured focus planes active, again, all of them are highlighted. Again, go back to the Edit menu at upper left, come down to right below where Auto Align is to Auto Blend Layers, and we're going to click on that. Okay. And in Auto Blend Layers pop-up, again, you want to be sure that Stack Images is what's clicked on, not Panorama, because again, we've got multiple images and we're moving to creating a single stacked, auto-blended, focus stacked image. And I personally would leave seamless tones and colors clicked on. It won't hurt to put content-aware fill, but it's not necessary for this. And so as we are doing this now, we'll click OK. And Photoshop will start processing, and I am going to pause while it is processing. Okay, so now the processing has finished from the focus stacking using the auto-align layers. And what you'll notice if you look over here in my layers panel is that what Photoshop has done is it has masked each of the individual capture layers to get a specific focus plane where there is sharpness. And then after saying which parts of each image have the sharpness, which is indicated by the white. So whatever is in white is sharp, and whatever is in black is hidden from view. And so that should represent the plane where you had the focus points in white, and the black should be the other areas. And as I said, these are stacked from first shot to last shot. So foreground to background is how it gets stacked. And then you'll also notice that what Photoshop has done is, in addition to creating these masks for each of these individual capture layers, it has also created a merged layer. So this is the focus stacked layer. So let me try to label that. So this is the aggregated focus stacked layer that Auto Blend Layers has created. And what you'll notice is that the entire image, the focused merged layer, has a selection around it. So if you want to be able to work with anything, you do need to turn that selection off. So you do a Control or Command D to make those marching ants go away. Now, one thing I will tell you that you may need to optionally do, because it's not always the cleanest masking that gets done on these images, is you might need to go back and do a little bit of doctoring on the masks just to be sure that each of these layers is representing a specific plane and not duplicating or getting involved with other planes that you don't want affected by the stacking. So to do that, you turn off the eyes, and I'll turn off just by dragging down the rest of the eyes on these other layers. So I've turned off the focus stack layer, and I'm just going to make active my first capture layer, which, let me click on the alter option and show you. So this is the mask for that layer. So normally I would do these adjustments with the image turned on, but this makes it easy to see that clearly there were focus points that were picked up by Photoshop beyond this railing area that was in the foreground right here in my image. So what you can do is go to your toolbar, and mine is docked right, so yours might be left. Come down to the brush tool, the one that looks like a paintbrush, left click on that. Make sure that if you want to hide an area, you have black as your foreground color. And because this particular layer for me is my foreground layer, I want to paint away some of these excess focus points on my mask. And again, be sure you're only painting with black or white on your mask. And you know it's active if there's a white frame around it. So do not paint on the actual image. So once I get that cleaned up so there's a little bit cleaner, sharp layer for that foreground layer, then I can do Alter Option again. It's like a toggle, and turn that back on. Okay, then I would come down to the next image, and you can do the same kind of thing. So with the mask active, this was the layer where I went to that first large tree. So again, the tree area I was focusing on was about in here, so that plane would go over in there, so we don't need some of this. This is probably okay, but will probably get duplicated in the other layers. So I'll just stay focused in this area here where I was. I'm not going to get too, again, perfectionist about this. And again, I'm painting with black to take away some of those excess focus points on that layer. I want to come down, I'll turn this eye off, come down to the next layer, make sure the eye is on, make sure that layer is active with the highlight, and working with the frame around the white mask. Again, I can paint out the area that represented my railing in the foreground because that was already covered, okay? And this plane should have been covered on the previous image, so I don't need that there. So I'll just tighten this up and sharpen this up a little bit, okay? Then I'll turn that eye off, come down to the next layer with the highlight on that layer and the frame around the mask. I was working on the cluster of trees back there, so again, I can get rid of some of this more foreground area. Okay, and then I was moving to further towards the background, eye on, layer active, working on the mask. That's actually pretty good based on the plane where I was working, which was back in here, so I'm not going to do anything to that layer. And then coming to this layer and activating it and clicking on the mask. I was focusing on this public art back here, so that sort of gets that whole area. So I think, you know, based on what I can see selected on these other masks, I feel pretty good about leaving this like this. This looks like it was covered here, so I can get rid of that excess little bit. But again, you can spend the time and look and see and just be sure that the masking that Photoshop created represents all the areas that you wanted covered. Now, once you get this focus stacked merged layer, what I typically do is just turn off all these component layers because they're unnecessary. They were used and were all combined to create this layer up here. And at this point now, I can even see it just looking at here, that now I have from front to back a railing that's in focus, these trees that are in focus. These trees are much more in focus than they were in that initial shot I showed you. I can see this little sculpture back here, which we couldn't. It was very soft, and you can see that this tree is a lot sharper than it was in that initial image that I showed you. So once you get to that point, you are finished with the focus stacking. You have done the auto blend layers. You have the areas of sharpness from front to back that you wanted to have sharp. And then at the end, you've turned off the component layers because you really don't need them. You can even just, if you want, select them and throw them out. And then optionally, if you want to go on and then do some more post-processing on, because you just did some very basic post-processing up front, if you want to go and then do more creative post-processing to this focus stacked image, you can do that. So for instance, I don't know, let's say, let me add a new blank layer, and I'll create a stamp layer, STAMP layer, and a stamp layer is basically just an aggregate of what's come before. So with that new layer active, let's say, I don't know, I might come over to the adjustments option in Photoshop, and let's just look at landscape. You can do a color pop. If you hover over these, you can see different options. There's a color pop, there's a regular pop. I kind of like the warm contrast because you could see there was warmth here and it had gotten a little bluer in the shadows. So let me just say, as an example, just to show you something, you can do an adjustment on that, but you could do brightness, contrast, coming to the bottom of your layers panel to the circle with the line through it, which is your adjustment layers. You can use any kinds of adjustments that you want to make to the image once you get it together. But that is it. So other than having to perhaps do some cleanup on your masks and then go on and do some creative post-processing after you get your focus stacked merged layer, that is it. So just to recap, in this video, what I did was I defined what focus stacking is. I mentioned different types of photography that it's useful for or that can benefit from using focus stacking. I provided a high-level photo capture set of tips that you could keep in mind when you're capturing the images to use for focus stacking. And then I showed how to use Photoshop's auto align and auto blend layers in order to focus stack a series of images and achieve front to back sharpness, so you can get much more significant depth of field in your images. So anyway, hope you have fun experimenting with focus stacking, and try it, and take care.